Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, students, faculty, alums, and those joining us from different parts of the country. We are delighted you're able to join us in this Seton Hall virtual community this afternoon. My name is B.J. Schecter, and I'm a professional in residence here at Seton Hall. I'm also editor and publisher at Baseball America. It's been quite a year, and as we've had to adjust our lives over the last year during the pandemic, can you really believe it's been 14 months since this began? We've pivoted in so many ways, socially, behaviorally, professionally. Are you sick of Zoom yet, or Teams? I am, and educationally. But with change comes opportunity, and we've worked hard to create opportunities for our students by bringing in the best in the business. This started in person some 18 months ago when Bob Costas and Bob Ley packed Bethany Hall, and has continued throughout the last year. We brought in the best and the brightest to your screens, tackling some of the biggest issues in society along the way. Today's event is entitled Dateline South Orange. Over the next hour, we're going to show you some of the sound bites and advice from our experts and examine the question, what have we learned? Today's event is part of the Sports Media Speaker Series and is co-sponsored by the College of Communication and the Arts and the Stillman School of Business. In the College of Communication and the Arts, we work very closely with our friends at Stillman, and more specifically, the Center for Sport Management and Professor Charlie Grantham, who will also be part of today's program. This is meant to be a dialogue, and we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end, and we'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. If you have questions during the event, please put them in the chat, and we'll monitor the chat, and if we can get to them, we will. I've been so fortunate to be joined and guided on this journey by Seton Hall alum Bob Ley. Bob is the best in the business, sports or otherwise, and he's a Hall of Famer in more ways than the many actual Halls of Fame he's in. He cares deeply about people, our students, and Seton Hall. My students know him well because he's not only been a guest in class, he's also been a regular presence. Today, I'm lucky to call him a friend and my co-host this afternoon. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bob Ley.
BJ, thank you very much. It has been look, we don't have to say it again, but it's been an extraordinary time, and so much has changed. The business of sports has changed. How we cover sports has changed. How sports is staged, televised. Journalism, the very definition of journalism, I think you could fairly say, has changed. And higher education has changed. And I think what we hope to try and do today is draw from some of the events, some of the classes, some of the guests that we had. We had an event last November about the year of playing dangerously, sports in the year of COVID. We had a 3-part series of panels during Black History Month, touching on diversity, inclusion, and necessity, looking at the college model in basketball, and also looking at the national pastime. And we've had specific guests in Professor Schefter's classes that have had to engage in it. I think you already said the important word, dialogue. It's here, this program and this series and our event today, for the benefit of the students to enrich your experience. And you're looking for, as you begin to think about your career ahead and decisions you have to make, specific courses of action, specific advice. You're going to hear some very specific things today. Some of them actually might be discordant. You'll have to make up your mind which one do I listen to. You're also going to have an opportunity to hear in real time a description from 2 different guests we've had of one, perhaps the most shocking COVID-related sports story of the past year, the Justin Turner story when he came back on the field during the World Series. But let's begin with a gentleman who worked for years at ESPN, won 16 Emmys. He's a spectacular writer, a marvelous storyteller. He's a good friend of both BJ and ours, talking about Tom Rinaldi, who gives rather specific advice as you begin to think about entering this field, how to do it, and what to do exactly right now.
I'd ask everybody in the class right now to do the following. There'll be no way for BJ or I to know whether you actually do this. You're on your honor. But before this weekend, I mean today or tomorrow, I'd like you to get an index card. And I'd like you to write the following phrase on it. What I want to do is, and then I'm going to challenge everybody to fill that out. You can change it many times, cross out, make changes to it. But the reason I suggest it with humility is as follows. It's so easy as young people to move from task to task, station to station, test to test, everything assigned. And we never contemplate path. We never think about where we're going. Where do the stations lead? Where are the assignments heading? What am I building? You're probably going to change the answer on that card many, many times. But having a sense, and I don't mean what I want to do is have a career in sports media. That doesn't cut it. I mean to drill down and be as specific as you can for now. The next step, the achievable, actionable goal. And then if you have a broader, deeper, greater goal, fine. Flip the card over and write that great goal on the back.
You know, Tom Rinaldi has experience before becoming a journalist. He was a school teacher, and I think, B.J., we got a real sense of that because I think he mesmerized the class. And that's just, I think, an exceptional piece of advice. Because, you know, fill the card out and change it, but you prop it up on your desk. You've got a daily, tangible goal to focus on.
You know, I love that, piece of advice, but not only we look at all the great people that we've had, through our classes and events, and Tom is one of my favorites, and I know you work very closely with him, Bob, and he's just a Class A person. As you mentioned, he was a former teacher, and, it's really refreshing when some of the best people in the business are the best people, I just love that piece of advice. The other thing that is not in that clip that he really hit home on with our students is the importance of writing. We see Tom on television and we see, these emotional, tear gripping, jerking stories, but they're so well written, and that's what carries the day. And I think he struck that chord as well. Exactly.
I mean, to take the time to go through a piece and realize that each word matters. The construction of each sentence matters. And if you're writing for television, you're writing for the ear. If you're writing for print, obviously you're writing for the eyes. And in both cases, you're writing for the brain and for the heart. But they get no better than Tom. And when you do write, and when you do report, the important thing is context. And if you're a reporter, you're a journalist, context is gained by being at events. It's gained by those interpersonal conversations. And of course, since March of 2020, all of that has been thrown up in the air. So we convened the panel in November. I thought it was fascinating. We called it, as I think I mentioned earlier, Sports in the Year of COVID, the year of playing dangerously. Our guests were Ken Rosenthal from Fox Television, Ramona Shelburne from ESPN, Dana O'Neill from The Athletic, and Aditi Kinkhabwala of the NFL Network, formerly of the Wall Street Journal, a native of New Jersey, by the way. And we talked about how do you become or maintain your practice as a journalist in the time of COVID when you are restricted to the phone, to the text, to the Zoom. You can't just sidle up next to somebody and talk about things, whether it's the headline issue or whether it's just something to maintain that relationship. And Aditi talked about that.
I love that you say this because I would love to show you a text message that I actually sent to two Steelers players today saying, reason number 862, I hate not being in the locker room. And it all has to do with missing context. It has to do with having, as you said, personal one-on-one conversations. It's not even necessarily what you share in a story or on air. It's just to understand yourself a little bit better, to have background, to, as I said, have context.
In fact, one of the examples I believe Aditi made on that panel that night, I think you may remember that, BJ, is just talking to some of the players about, I think, child rearing issues or preschool issues or whatnot, just the everyday stuff that people go through to help you maintain a relationship. But you made a point, which I think is interesting, because as journalists now, press availability has migrated into a cocoon.
It has, and we talk about Zoom and we joke about Zoom, and you look at the NBA, the NFL, any college during the NCAA tournament, And these press conferences, this media availability where it was inside the locker room is now via Zoom. And you're very familiar, Bob, with soccer in the mixed zone, that type of thing. But these things are here to stay, and something is lost there. And, a personal note on Aditi, I've known Aditi, for the better part of 20 plus years when many of our students, she was like many of our students. She was an intern. Not even in the department that I was working in. And the thing, that comes across in that clip is she's so personable. We're going to talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. She uses the fact that she's Indian, Indian American, she's the daughter of Indian immigrants to, her advantage to connect to people because she's so personable. It's harder to do that now.
Yeah, very, very difficult. When you talked about diversity and inclusion, and obviously, we'll talk about it from a number of angles, and one of them in our next clip is from gender. And it's a question I didn't ask, you didn't ask. It was a question that was asked by actually a student athlete at Seton Hall University, Lizzie Wen, and it goes back to the November gathering with Bob Costas in November of 2019. I'll answer the question first here because of the way the conversation flows. Then you'll hear from Bob.
So, as a female student athlete, I would love to know your take on how you think sports media has changed for women, specifically opportunities, growth, maybe challenges that they would face. I would just love to know your take on it.
I got to tell you, I have seen, not just by numbers, but by qualities of the people involved, not just behind the scenes, in front of the camera. I've seen, I think, significant growth in the last 15 or 20 years. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about it. There is a meritocracy because for all the reasons Bob and I have been talking about for the last few minutes, people at home are so critical. The bar is set so high editorially, you've got to have your stuff down. So anybody who's out there has to be prepared. And I am totally enthused about that. I went outside the lines when I left that program. The three producers and the lead producer, all three of them were women. That didn't register to me every day when I'm going to class. It sounds like some of my best friends are women, but yeah, you know what I'm saying. I saw it displayed in the workplace I worked in. I think you probably saw the same thing. I'd like to think it needs to be better at the senior executive level. That's where change comes, really. That's where the thinking isn't just like, oh, geez, we're counting heads. No, it's ingrained in the ethic and the practice of the company.
When I started and throughout the early stages of my career, a female sports broadcaster was a novelty. Now it's taken for granted. Their numbers have grown exponentially, and except in a few Neanderthal sectors, I think they're judged simply on their credibility and quality. No one thinks anything of it when a woman is commenting on a sport that she has not played. Like, let's say Jessica Mendoza played softball at a very high level. She didn't play baseball, but her credibility comes from the quality of her comments. Women do not play football, but they can host football shows. No one thinks that Hannah Storm doesn't know what she's talking about. I think the next frontier, however, is in the play-by-play realm. There are a handful, Beth Mowens,
Gail Sirens,
but since retired, but a few others. But there is with the audience, and it will take some getting used to. Even those who accept female broadcasters in every other role, they're used to hearing a male voice on play-by-play. And somebody who's exceptionally good, maybe a few somebodies, are going to have to crack that glass ceiling. But other than that, and when we talk about on the air, I think it's moving. That train is moving quickly.
You know, Bob had mentioned women in play-by-play roles, and even before that conversation that we had back in November of last year, Hannah Storm and Andrea Kramer were teaming up on Amazon's Thursday night games as one of the audio options. I remember doing a commentary the day that Amazon made that announcement that they were bringing them aboard to do that. I mean, I know both of these women well. They're both former colleagues and friends. And Hannah and Andrea have forgotten more NFL than I'll ever know. And they're exquisitely qualified to do that. So I know it sounds a couple of Bob and I saying this in front of 500 people, a couple of middle or older age white guys talking about the progress of women. But I think empirically it bears out. There is every reason to see that there are meaningful roles. And I'll continue to say what I said at that gathering, BJ, is that at the executive level, that's where change becomes ingrained in the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our students here, I'll say this, and I've been, I've encouraged, and mentored so many young women, to pursue a career in sports media, if that's, their passion, they feel that's their calling. We're not there yet. We have a long way to go as you stay, in the executive levels. There's still some, Neanderthal culture, but we've come a long way. And, I've seen that, in my 30 years of sports media. And I would encourage every woman here, every, woman who is listening here, if you love sports, if you love to write, broadcast, please do it, because we need more women, in our industry. The fact of the matter is, it's been very largely white male. We're becoming more diverse, but we need more women. And it's gone well beyond the realm of sideline reporters. You mentioned Ramona Shelburne, Aditi, and Dana O'Neill, who are part of, that panel back in November. Three of the most respected journalists in their fields. Dana's been, a part of many different things here at Seton Hall. She's written a lot about our men's basketball program, has become a pseudo beat writer. And, Dana's not looked at, as, a female who covers sports. She's looked at a darn good sports journalist, and that's where we need to be. Possibly the best print piece I've read in the last month. And I was tipped to it by Gary Cohen, listening to a Mets telecast a couple of weeks ago, and it's still on ESPN.com. And if you're a Mets fan, especially as I am, great win last night, bizarre ninth inning. But if you're a Mets fan, you'll love the piece that Liz Merrill, wrote for ESPN.com about the '69 Mets and the mortality of cognitive disease and aging and whatnot. The two players who, frankly, are heroes to many of us. I mean, it was 14 to win the World Championship. Liz Merrill, I was corresponding with her last night. The opportunities are there. So for those that work hard. So when you get to the question, how do I get there? What are the qualities that I need to establish myself? What are the mental exercises? Or what are the work habits you can get through? You can do no better than talk to a guy who made his name of the Bergen record, Woj, the man who's dropped many Woj bombs around the NBA, Adrian Wojnarowski. He talks about the building blocks in his career. I mean, this is a man who's the ultimate. I'm sure we all know, but if you're not an NBA head, and you're not into him, he's the ultimate NBA insider. I mean, he knows things before people in the league know them, certainly. And he talks about the qualities you need to be a reporter on a beat and just to be a good journalist, period.
Persistence and working at it every single day. Over time, people respect that, and I think they're drawn to it. And typically, people want you to get the story right if you're covering their world. And that doesn't mean they're always going to like what you report. That doesn't mean they shouldn't always like what you're going to report. But they know you're going to be fair. You're going to be honest. You're going to be well versed in the matter, in the subject matter, and that adds up over time. And it's something you build over time. You talk about building sources, relationships. You really do it one at a time. You do it day by day. You stack one on top of another, and then you maintain those relationships. You call people when you don't need anything from them. You call people not when there's a story breaking and they're part of the world or they're part of the neighborhood, but when you're just checking in. And because your best story ideas are not going to come from your editor. They're not going to come from the professor in your class who gives an assignment out. The best story ideas you're going to get are going to be because you are out talking to the people in that world. That's how you're going to stay ahead of ideas. That's how you're going to know what's coming. it's easy to get assigned a story about something that's already happened or reacting to something. When you really get this thing rolling as a reporter is when you can anticipate what's coming next and getting out in front of it. And the only way, to me, you can do that, or one of the, almost invariably, is you are having a constant conversation all the time with the people in that world, and they will anticipate for you what's coming. And you have to be listening closely, because, and I'm guilty of it all the time. Someone will say it and you'll miss it.
I mean, that's about a specific and useful piece of advice on so many different levels. And by the way, BJ, we should issue a blanket apology for both of us at this point for our pandemic hair. We just saw yours, mine's waiting in the wings. So, we eventually did get to the barber, to the stylist. But when Woj talked about that, I mean, I think he expanded on missing something. And just recently he said he was having a conversation with an NBA executive who dropped something and they had glossed over. And so the executive who had known him for a while said, no, what I'm saying is, and that comes from, as he said, Professor, just calling people when you don't need to break news with them, just to check in with them. That's important.
Yeah, it's about relationships. And, there's no better at relationships than Woj. And, you want to talk about an education for our students. And you look at the big three sports. So we've had Woj, we've had Adam Schefter, who, you'll see in a little bit, and then Ken Rosenthal, who you'll also see, and Tom Verducci in baseball. So these are the biggest information people, in sports. And why are they good at their jobs? Because they know how to talk to people, and it's not just about, hey, give me the story. It's, sometimes it's just checking in. How you doing? How's the family? Are you someone that can be trusted? Or are you someone who really wants to get the story right? That's what Woj said. Most people want you to get the story right. They may not want you to do the story, but if you get it right and you're fair, you're going to earn that credibility.
Yeah, so you've got information guys, and you mentioned Tom Verducci and Schefter, who we'll hear from, and certainly Woj, who on a given day, they're tweeting 15, 20, 35 times. Schefter the other evening on the NFL draft, breaking the story of Aaron Rodgers and possibly wanting out of Green Bay. And then contrast that with investigative reporting. And there's no better practitioner of that than my friend Don Van Natta, who was a two-time winner of the Pulitzer when he worked for the New York Times and has been at ESPN. And Don is given leave and time to go out and get a story and works on stories for months. He also has a series called, you'll hear him refer to backstory in his soundbite. That's what he's talking about. And we had been talking about, I think in class, the Manti Te'o story that Deadspin wrote. The fact that Deadspin, a blog, could really break a mainstream story. But there's a lot inherent in what Don's about to talk about. And we're going to apologize. Sometimes technology is not perfect. He's on a still frame. Listen to what he says. His lips aren't moving. He talks about the qualities of just simple inquisitiveness. That makes you an investigative reporter.
Now, so much of investigative reporting, this is a little bit of the conceit of backstory, but it's really served me well, is going back and looking at a story and what were questions that weren't answered by the media. It's often almost endemic, right? In this kind of reporting of going, well, wait a minute, I'm reading this, but there's 2 or 3 questions here that nobody is answering. Let me go there. If you do that, and look, Deadspin got a tip. I do want to say this. So Deadspin got a tip, and they didn't do what I'm saying, but a lot of investigative reporters will tell you they often will look at a story. That's how Seth and I ended up doing the Flakegate story. It was like, what's going on here? There's so much. Why is a battering ram being used to hammer Tom Brady over some deflated footballs? It seems so silly, right? What's really going on here? That was the question, and I raised it, and Seth and I decided to try to go answer it. And the result of it was that piece. Oftentimes, it's just a question you may have as you're looking at some story in sports or anywhere else that you don't feel the media is covering, and that's the lane that you can take as a journalist. Try to ask really, questions that nobody else is asking and really distinguish yourself. And BJ, to your point, there's so many opportunities today, and I know Bob speaks really eloquently about this too, where you don't need some big platform. If you, as a young reporter, come up either with a tip or come up with a question that you're asking on some story that isn't being answered by anybody, and you want to be an investigative reporter or investigator, you are. As soon as you start asking questions that nobody else is asking of the right people, and either through documents or through interviews or both, you come up with a story that nobody else has come up with, you're an investigative reporter.
It sounds simple, and basically it is that simple. That you sit down and ask yourself, how did we get from A to B to C? And Don, who does a lot of work, I know, with his alma mater at Boston University as well, has been a regular visitor to our class. I know we appreciate everything he brings each time he comes.
Yeah, investigative reporting is near and dear to my heart. I was an investigative reporter, an investigative editor, and I still consider myself that. It's kind of, and you too, Bob, outside the lines. You dug deep into stories, and it's journalism at its finest. And it really starts with the question as to why or how. And I could have talked to Don all day. I remember that Manti Te'o story. I was an editor at Sports Illustrated when one of our writers, did the story that we put him on a cover, Te'o, when if people don't remember that this was before the MTV show Catfish. In fact, I didn't know what catfishing was. A few people did. And, Te'o had said he had a girlfriend who had died. It turns out this girlfriend was made up, and somebody was made up a profile online that created, this persona, and he was embarrassed. And so the lie continued. And so just asking that question and just digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And the media, at its finest, and media has been beat up a lot, fake news, and sometimes rightfully so. But good investigative journalism, it is a great service. We saw that, with Watergate. We saw that with Spotlight, in the Boston Globe, and what they did with the Catholic Church scandal. We see it so many times, and it's really, really important.
Yeah, it's essential, and it's an investment, and a good way to judge the economic stability of the journalism as is going forward is how much more of it will we continue to see. Now we've got a real treat for you, because you're going to hear a firsthand account of what I think was probably one of the most surprising, if not the most surprising, sports stories relating to COVID. It's the Justin Turner story. If you're not familiar, Game 6 of the World Series, Dodgers about to win their first championship since 1988. Suddenly, he leaves the game late with several innings to play. Well, as it turned out, of course, he had a positive COVID test come back a day after. So baseball's bubble was breached, and it got even worse as he later would come out. But what we have now is a visit from Ken Rosenthal of Fox Sports, who is situated right next to the Dodger dugout. So here's Kenny to tell us what was happening, what he saw as this was happening, and learning how to pivot from reporting on a game to observing a news story right in front of you.
When I heard after the Game 6 that Turner had tested positive, I was as shocked as anyone else. And it was such a weird scene because I was down covering for Fox right next to the Dodgers dugout. And I saw the commotion when he left the game. And I was stunned that he was not in the game. They were about to win the World Series. First time since NBA. He's been on the team since 14. He's a huge part of who they are. And then usually I could find out why a guy has left the game. It's not that complicated. Couldn't do it. And then I saw he wasn't on the bench as the game was about to end. I was just baffled by all this.
Did a positive test even enter your mind?
No, it did not, Bob.
Yeah.
I thought he must be really hurt. It never crossed my mind that it could be a positive test because there hadn't been a positive test in almost 2 months in the entire sport. So people say, well, why did the league find this out during the game? Apparently, that's how the testing was working the entire time. Mm-hmm. What they would do is they test you one day, send the test out to a lab in Utah that the league was using, and they would come back early the next evening. Yes. It wasn't a problem for 4 rounds until the final night, and then it became a big problem.
It was a big problem, and again, exploding into the middle of a game, a major story. I think back to like the 1989 World Series before Game 3, the earthquake hit, which shows you, BJ, the necessity to be trained. You might be a sports reporter, but you are a reporter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was watching it like the rest of us. And as I said at the top, I run Baseball America, a baseball publication. And, we saw all the lengths that baseball went to have a season. A 50-game season and testing. They, if we recall, the NBA and the NHL had a bubble. Baseball did not. They were very, very conscious in not doing it. I was screaming at the TV, when Turner, kind of came back out on the field, which, we'll hear about in a second. And it's like, how, why? And I remember during our event asking, Ken, like, why was he still there? Why was he allowed to stay in the stadium, and given access to, potentially go in the locker room or out on the field or whatever. And some of these questions, we don't know, but in real time, to see people like Kenny Rosenthal, who was one of the best in the business, react. And that comes from instincts and training.
It does. And so Kenny's part of the team at Fox Sports, and the coordinating producer for Fox Sports on that event, in charge of the host set, pre- and post-game coverage, is the Seton Hall alum class of 1995, my good friend Bardia Charest, who several months after Kenny visited with our panel was a guest in class. And so now he picks up the story. Turner is tested positive out of the game. We've learned he's tested positive, and he's about to come out in the field. And suddenly the entire apparatus of the Fox network has got to pivot from just covering the post-game celebration to covering this exploding news story. And here it is.
Yes, that came up right after the Dodgers won the World Series. So we planned this, big elaborate post-game show, and right before the ninth inning started, got called into the executive control room, and my bosses are like, "Hey, Justin Turner tested positive for COVID. That's why he left the game. What we have to do is Burkhart's just got to read the news story and get it back out, and just move on." So there's a big balance between, hey, here's this Dodgers just won the World Series first time since 1988. We're going to have all these great guests on the show. We're going to have a lot of fun. And meanwhile, here's this crazy developing story. So Burkhart's a total pro, and he did it. And, we sent it out to site, and Verducci's great. He's asking Manfred about it. And, we're waiting on updates. But then we're interviewing guys, we're having fun, and Ortiz is being a wild man, telling Corey Seager not to get married. And then Justin Turner comes out on the field without a mask. It's just craziness. So I think it's just being nimble, being fortunate to have good people there to help you get through it, like Burkhart, Ken Rosenthal, is a great resource.
Having good people around you, certainly, but Bardia, again, class of 95, was in the chair. And so, we've all been in those situations when suddenly the unexpected presents itself. And that comes from a grounding of having the whole toolbox of skills. Right? You're not a sports television person. You're a sports journalist. You're a journalist at heart, and in putting that all to work.
Yeah, sometimes, in our business, yes, you have to know how to write. You have to know how to talk to people, but at some point, once you have that base foundation, your instincts, take over, and nobody can prepare for a news event. I know in 1989, Bob, you were in San Francisco where there was an earthquake. Nobody can prepare you for that. I remember, my, wake up, and you're going to last in this business moment came when I was in college, like our students here. And I was a student at Northeastern University, and Reggie Lewis was playing for the Celtics. Now, as we know, the late Reggie Lewis. And so he was a star. He came right after Larry Bird. He led him to the playoffs, and he had a heart problem. And he was told that he was not cleared to play by a dream team of doctors, and there was one doctor that said he could. And so he was the Celtics at the time were practicing at Brandeis University, right outside of Boston. And it was during the summer. It was in July, the off season, and he was playing with like 8 guys from the Northeastern basketball team, so who I knew, and he dropped dead. And the whole media world descended on Brandeis University. What do you do? Like, there's literally 500 media members. Well, I happen to know all the guys on the team that were playing with him. Yeah. And they were off in the corner crying. Nobody else knew who they were. So what did I do? And I talked to them. Not like, hey, with my notepad, what happened, whatever. First, you're a human, you're compassionate. They witnessed this horrific thing. But then, at the end of the day, like, you get the story. You find a way, to get the story. And sometimes it's instincts. And sometimes, like, it's just being a human and compassionate.
Yeah, exactly. And, well, getting that story and seeing a story that you get the beat on in print is a great feeling. One of our panels during Black History Month was on the national pastime, baseball, which has a lot of issues, the age of its demographics, its cultural relevance, the question of cultural expression in the game, bat flipping, things going on the field. One of our guests on that panel was Dontrelle Willis, who pitched 9 seasons in the majors, a former Rookie of the Year, a 2-time All-Star, a runner-up for the Cy Young Award. And we asked him about he has an interesting take here. It's somewhat counterintuitive, but about the whole issue of the cultural give and take, push-pull, and the modern cultural take of baseball. Here's what Dontrelle said.
Just talking about the personality of the game is so critical. And I think ultimately people are too sensitive, and so when I give up a home run, I'm not looking at the bat flip, I'm looking at the damn ball flying out of the stadium. You know what I mean? So I don't understand that aspect of the game. I love the energy. It's a crazy thing, and I'm sure a lot of people from Seton Hall will like it. We played the Yankees in the World Series in 2003. They were supposed to run all over us, and we understood we have to play our style of baseball. And one of the greats, Juan Pierre, he says, we're going to play our game the right way. And I swear, game 1, he gets a base hit to the left side, still second. Luis Castillo moves the runner over, and then Pudge hits a sac fly. We're up 1-0. That took all of 4 minutes. So, if you're looking at perspective, it's like, oh my God, the Marlins are for real. They understand how to play the game the correct way. I mean, half the stadium wasn't even sat down with their hot dogs and their beer. They're like, the Yankees are down 1-0. So, I tell that story because it's so important. And you see in postseason baseball, it's always that situation comes up, moving the runner, and the guy fails at doing that because he wants to hit a run. Bunting, little things like that. So I'm always really, really hammering home, play the game the right way, play small ball, and you'll be a champion. So, but again, does it get you a $30 million contract? Who knows? But you got to play the game the right way.
It's an interesting take on the question of the emotions shown in the game and the cultural back and forth. Well, what I find interesting is that baseball, and we talked about this on the panel, is now selling the game, the sizzle, the salsa, if you will, which only 4 or 5 years ago, the old school people might have been frowning at. Now it's a calling card because they have challenges in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, I love Dontrelle. I so wish he was playing right now. Yeah. And he was, of all the guests that that we've had, I've never laughed so hard just because he's so entertaining. But, what he says has so much validity, in the game today. And we see, Fernando Tatis Jr., who you're talking about, like a $35 million a year contract. Well, he's got it. And he plays the game with so much joy and enthusiasm. He just had an incident with Trevor Bauer where they were trolling back and forth on social media. He hit home run and he literally turned around and covered his eye, to Dontrelle's earlier story. Like, he's looking at the darn ball going out of the stadium. But I want to bring it back to journalism, a little bit, because he talked about in baseball doing the little things and playing the game the right way. And, that applies to everything that we're talking about right here, because anybody with a Twitter account or a phone can claim they're a journalist, but they're not. And anybody can, try to, break a story or have their 15 seconds of fame. But at the end of the day, it's like what Woj said, building relationships, putting in the reps, being fair, learning how to write, doing things the right way, And if you're going to be a journalist and you're going to be, have lasting, impact in this or just time in this industry, as we're changing by the minute, you got to do the little things.
Absolutely. Stephen A. Smith made that point. Stephen A. known for his commentary and his opinions. We'll talk about opinions in a little bit, but Stephen A. was a beat writer and a columnist and got edited like we all get edited and blue penciled and words moved around. So you can't get to there until you can get the basics done. Our first panel back in February during Black History Month was diversity, inclusion, necessity. And of course, we all know that the nation has just gone through a cathartic social spasm since last summer, the murder of George Floyd, and also the fact that sports historically has had a cutting-edge position in the area of social justice. I mean, just last NBA postseason, 3 games postponed, one day when the Bucks walked out over the Jacob Blake shooting in Kenosha. But the question that arises, is sports still on that cutting edge, which is the question I put to Elizabeth Newman. Elizabeth, who BJ knows well from her time at Sports Illustrated, is currently also teaching at Howard University. And I asked her about sports' historic role in the area of social justice.
I think it's leading in that it has a camera on it. The spotlight is on sports, and people are observing and watching what is happening with diversity in sports, whether it be across racial lines or involving gender, women in certain sports, in football, in NBA, what have you. But I also think that there's this perception that diversity in sports has a glass ceiling. That if you are a part of the 60+% that is an NFL player, if you are a part of the 70+% that is a person of color in Major League Baseball, that's fine. That's the status quo. Anything beyond that, you don't have a right to ask for a position. You should be happy that you're allowed to play in this league that can potentially earn you millions. But if you want to work outside of that, after you retire, if you want to be an executive, if you want to be an owner, if you want to be a coach, in some factions of society, that's too much. You've already reached your potential, your maximum potential.
It's a fascinating aspect to covering sports and covering the social justice movement in sports, where, for example, LeBron James has consistently been outspoken. But when the entire Daryl Morey tweet NBA China issue went down well back before last season, didn't hear a lot from him, and he took his share of criticism for his recent tweet. Certainly he's in a leadership position, but it just shows you the attention that is paid on everyone in sports when they step out. Many more people have stepped out to speak on social justice issues, but the bar still is high.
Yeah, and I think it's really, really important, to have this dialogue, and that's why we did this series during Black History Month, Bob, where we had 3 panels. This one, the first one that Elizabeth was on, was specifically on diversity and inclusion and the necessity of that. And it's really important to have the dialogue at all levels, and it starts here. And I know our next few bites, really hit on that.
It's Doug Glanville was part of the baseball panel, but he gave us a great tour of the horizon. Doug was with me when we went to Cuba in 2016. In fact, he was on the game announce crew, and he was one among those who interviewed President Obama. That's when the Tampa Bay Rays played the Cuban national team. One of the things that was percolating in the news earlier this year was the gentleman who at the time was the president of the Seattle Mariners in public comments disparaging the language abilities of a former Japanese player who played for Seattle and an up-and-coming Hispanic player, also talking openly about the manipulation of service time for arbitration. So that's our takeoff point for Doug Glanville, who's a very thoughtful guy who takes us on a tour of the horizon. He's a guy who's also been a columnist for the New York Times, as I said, a former Major League Baseball player. So with the Seattle comments as a takeoff point, listen to Doug's theory of the case here, if you will.
Well, takeaway is that, he put it out to light, and I think that's important. The conversations that we've been having have been trying to get at some realness about these perceptions, these viewpoints that also dovetail with power. I think that's the big issue, because as a player, or if you're trying to buy a house in a neighborhood, whatever it may be, when someone has this level of power over your future and your fate, and they have that type of view on you, it's highly problematic. Of course it plays into your opportunity. Of course it plays into your future, and that is the leadership. And so all these teams and organizations in the league can use this opportunity to look inward and say, hey, you know what? We don't approve of this, although we recognize that he might have put a neon sign to it, but this exists in very subtle and nuanced ways also. And having that sort of wherewithal and the instincts to understand that it doesn't have to be a cross burned on your lawn, so to speak, but it actually exists in these more subtle ways is important. I think that's been a big part of the last year, of just having listening sessions and hearing that things that are mundane and basic are not really simple for many people in our society that are disenfranchised or are discriminated against. It comes in very subtle ways. It comes in ways that seem unexpected. But I know for me, like, basic things in my life are not really that simple. Buying a house, getting a cab, getting my kids in school. Everything comes with this supercharged awareness.
Shoveling snow in your case.
Shoveling snow.
which led to a new law in the state of Connecticut, those that aren't familiar with those activists. About police jurisdiction. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so those things are not taken for granted. So we could learn a lot from that. And so the way he's framed it, you notice that, he talked about money and he tied it to Seeger, but the players of color, the international players, got treated with this disrespect around their cultural identities. And I think it's a distinction that's important to make. One, you're talking about their bottom line, the others are talking about who they are. So you got to look at that. And that is the problem when you don't have voices of diversity at leadership levels. Even the best of us, when you have an echo chamber around yourself, your ideas are going to be narrow and limited to that echo chamber. And that's all the more reason if baseball wants to grow, one opportunity to do that is to get as many of these voices to represent the game so that all of us feel welcome.
I just love Doug. He's just so thoughtful, continues to be a thought leader, but is fearless in his opinions.
Yeah, I mean, he's just, he said it all. That's, we mentioned, the problem with the lack of diversity in the front office and, the executive level, levels, it's a systematic problem, and he hit it on every part of that.
So it's an opinion. So let's bring it back to sports journalism. And again, let's go back to our conversation with Bob Costas and a question that was actually posed by Seton Hall student Ronald Castaneda about exactly that. When to inject yourself and your thinking and your opinions into a story.
Mr. Costas, you don't shy away from saying your opinions on certain matters. Would you recommend that for every other news or sportscaster, even if they're just getting started in their career?
Well, it depends upon the context. First of all, in a news broadcast, except when it's clearly labeled as commentary, and it doesn't happen so much anymore, but back in the day, Eric Severide or someone would do a commentary on the CBS News, or Andy Mooney would do commentaries on 60 Minutes. Unless it's clearly delineated that way, no. And when someone is just starting, well, maybe on the campus station, yes. But if you're just starting in your professional career, it's not a wise professional choice. Plus, you don't have the acceptance from the audience and the credibility to do it. But even if you have gained, you hope, that acceptance and that credibility, especially in this environment, you've got to be willing. You could say, here's my opinion, it's a good idea to give milk to orphans. And there would be somebody out there that hated you for saying that. And you have to be willing to take that.
And Bob would know about that because he'd been doing halftime commentaries when he was with NBC on NFL games. By the way, if you don't follow the industry that closely, it's just announced in the last week or so, he's going to rejoin HBO for a quarterly show back on the record. So it'll be good to see him back with conversations and interviews and I'm sure commentaries about that. But it comes down to how to pick and choose. And you got to be real careful about that, I think, as Bob explained, BJ.
Yeah, you do like, and you know, my advice to everybody: establish yourself first before you start flying around with opinions, because you need to establish some credibility. Real quick, the point I want to make to our students is opportunity, right? So Ronnie Casanega and Michael Daly was the other student up there. There was a contest, actual essay contest to get up there on stage. And so they had the opportunity, these two students, along with two student athletes, to get on the stage with yourself, Bob, and Bob Costas. So the opportunity is there. The opportunity is there as people come in and out of our events and in classes. Take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah. And we were talking about opinions with Bob and Ronnie's question. And of course, if you think back to the Super Bowl in February of this year in the CBS pregame, I mean, there is no bigger platform than the Super Bowl, and the Super Bowl pregame, if you're a host, is about as big as it gets. And James Brown of CBS took the occasion to lambaste the National Football League over their history of racial hiring practices and results and numbers and statistics. The word he used was pitiful. And so on one of our panels in February, one of our guests, Michael Smith, Michael, of course, former host of the 6 Sports Center with Jamel on ESPN. He's a current principal of Inflection Point Entertainment. And I asked him for his reaction in light of everything else happening in the area of social commentary and social justice about the James Brown comment.
Saying Black Lives Matter, it's easy, frankly. It's comfortable at this point. It's popular. It's trendy. Black careers matter too. Black livelihoods matter too. And to Elizabeth's point, and to your question about James Brown, I appreciated that he said it because, as I watch out of one eye the impeachment proceedings, the establishment wants us to just forget, act like it never happened, move on. Let's move forward without accountability. Sports leagues, sports media, the entire sports industry at large needs to do some accounting, some self-accounting, and levy some sort of accountability as it relates to how we got here before we can effectively move forward. And a lot of the hiring practices, promotions, the way that we even talk about Black coaches, Black executives, Black quarterbacks, Black commentators, Black writers, Black reporters needs to evolve.
It's a question of perception. It's a question of language. It's a question of commentary. It's also a question of whether indeed things change. We're going to hear in just a second from Professor Charles Grantham. He's your colleague. You work closely with him. Is there anything that happens in sports that Charlie's not wired into?
No, he's like the Godfather, and everybody knows and respects Charlie. And, just to wrap that, Charlie and Michael, they're just brilliant comments, together. It's like we're here to, whether we're in the classroom, whether we're, in an executive suite or, working, to learn and grow. If we're not learning and growing, what are we doing, every single day? And what I love about this, and I've been friends with Charlie for years, and, I've known Michael Smith since he came out of Loyola of New Orleans, is like they bring different viewpoints and perspectives, and I learned so much just talking to them.
Yeah, and one of the things we learned when Professor Grantham was with us is the director for the Center for Sports Management at the Stillman School. And as you look at this next clip, you'll see that we placed up the actual newspaper clipping that Charles wrote back in 1992. The former chief executive of the NBA Players Union is writing an opinion piece in the New York Times excoriating the NBA, commonly thought to be the most socially advanced or progressive league. Then in 92, about their hiring practices, and this is what Professor Grantham had to say about things not changing that much.
And the bottom line here is that we have continued status quo. We have continued to stay in place. And the reason I cite that is because I continue to go back to Martin Luther King Jr. I fortunately had the opportunity to attend that march in 1963. And when he says, through education, we seek to change attitudes. And through court action or court orders and legislation, we seek to change behavior. And so I fast forward to 2021, and I go back and think about that, and I say, okay, guys, you know, it's the beginning of the semester. We spent a lot of time in my class talking about the commissioner and the power and the authority of the commissioner. And we go back to Landis, who was the first commissioner of Major League Baseball, had overwhelming power. And such power that that was pushed toward, you know, the whole concept of having an exemption to the antitrust law because of the powers we sort of embedded in the commissioner. And the reason we did that is because, quite frankly, he was the guy who called upon to determine, to the arbitrator in disputes between owners or players, etc., banning players for life, banning owners for life. And so when you think about that, and in 1942, Jackie Robinson and Ralph Campanella, Roy Campanella, had tryouts in baseball, but it wasn't until 47 that Mr. Landis allowed them in. So for the best interest of the game clause that he had in baseball, and granted to him as a commissioner, he could have integrated baseball in 42. But on publicly, he was saying there are no rules barring blacks from playing in this league. But privately, he was saying, if you do it, you're going to have to deal with me.
Just a spectacular analysis of that situation, which is, you know, what we expect from him each time. But it shows the, the role of journalists in holding leagues accountable to their numbers. I think of Dr. Richard Lapchick, the pioneering sports sociologist, currently it's the University of Central Florida, who does that and issues his regional report card. I mean, all of that are tools for journalists to use in beginning to navigate through this continuing and evolving story of social justice and sports' role in it.
Yeah, and it just goes to show you, like, use all the tools and resources at your disposal. Like, Charlie is right here at Seton Hall. So for whether you're, a business student, journalism or visual and sound media student, here's right here at Seton Hall is the former executive director of the NBA Players Association, who really, instituted the salary cap because he knew they had to do something. So, like, we have this great resource that's right here. Charlie's testified before Congress. He's represented players. He negotiated deals for the Dream Team to play in Barcelona. So there's really nothing he hasn't done.
Yeah. So we're going to pivot back to career advice. As we do, though, I want to make an ancillary point. I want to note that all these sound bites that you've seen and the production and the graphics that have been graciously done for us by a Seton Hall alum, Keith Egan, who graduated in, I believe, December of 2019, who worked with BJ and I on the Bob Costas production, produced that, who graduated, as we said, in 2019, was shooting a great deal for the basketball program and the athletic department. His videos, which are spectacular, is now shooting NFL games, working with the NFL Network and the league itself. Also, I believe, producing and shooting political commercials, all based in short order in less than a year and a half from his time at the Hall. And we thank him for himself, but he's also, I think, a great example of having a plan, which leads me to this next bite, which I just think is amazing. It's Adam Schefter. I mean, how many millions does he have on Twitter?
I think he's got like 8 million, over 8 million.
All right. Here is one of the best reporters, if not the best reporter on the face of the earth, but talking about career advancement and having a plan. And he basically talks about not really having one at that point.
And then when I got to Denver as a newspaper writer, because I was in Denver and didn't know anybody there, I said, well, let me volunteer to work at the TV station on the weekends. Like, they were thrilled that they were going to get a newspaper writer on who could provide insight to them. And so I had no idea, but I was doing a television segment each week. And again, lo and behold, I was awful on air. But I got a lot of reps each weekend, once a week, not a lot, but some reps, being on camera and getting used to that. And I've got the initial clips, in my home office. Like, if you watch the beginning, they're terrible. And I don't think anybody goes onto TV initially and succeeds at that, right? Like, it takes a while. I'll bet you Bob's first clips are probably not very good, as great as Bob was on air. And so, but what I did do while I was in Denver, I worked on becoming a better reporter. I worked on building relationships. I got experience doing TV. I got experience doing radio. I got to know a lot of people. And I didn't know where it was leading. I had no idea. If I was that smart when I was their age, I would have said, boy, that was a brilliant game plan on my part. Brilliant. Played out just the way but it was total dumb luck the way it all played out. But, again, to come back to the point, whatever you're doing, be great. Try hard. Do things that other people won't. Make yourself indispensable if you can.
That is great advice. I mean, and never say no and do as many different things. But I just find it astonishing. And, you know, there are many different paths to get to the mountaintop. And Schefter told us basically he didn't really have one at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of my favorite pieces of advice because it's so true. And we talk about the little things. Work hard. You know, like, you know, and John Fanta's another great example. You mentioned Keith Egan, who's terrific. You know, John Fanta at the age of 26 is calling play-by-play for Fox, and he's still doing, you know, Big East tennis and, you know, and golf and, you know, everything. He's still honing his skills. And so, like, if you're going to do something, like, go all in. And, you know, never say no. Don't be too selective, which is going to come up in a second.
Well, it is because Adam Schefter's boss is a friend of mine, Seth Markman, this senior coordinating producer. I think he's a vice president at ESPN and NFL production, a hire fire guy with I think, by the way, Seth was in charge of the coverage of the NFL draft, just the recent one, but I think most significantly last year's. Seth visited class after that. It was a spectacular technical and editorial achievement in the throat of the pandemic in the early months to have the NFL draft. And Seth was at the helm of that. And so I think he knows what he's talking about. And here's a very cogent piece of advice.
What I try to tell people that are trying to get on TV, in this, you know, like for you guys in college and stuff, is the first job is so important. And I try to tell people not to be too selective, not to be overly selective. Like I talked to a college student the other day, and he had a job offer at he wants to be a sportscaster. He wants to be on TV. He had a job offer in Washington State. I can't remember what town it was in, smaller market. And, you know, he said to me on the phone, and I'll never forget it. He was like, listen, I live in New Jersey. I have no interest in moving to Washington. Yeah. Like, and I was like, look, you know, that's your decision. And sort of like, you know, I'm not going to tell you what to do for your life, but I will say that, like, this is a really good opportunity and a really good start, and you need to start somewhere. And especially now, like the way the world is right this second, like, I don't think you have if you really want to chase this dream, you know, being selective like that, you know, I don't think it's smart. And then, you know, because ultimately you're looking for somewhere to start, to get reps, to get experience in the business. You know, everybody understands the way this works, and like they understand that, like, if you knock it out of the park in that smaller town, you're going to be looking to the next town up, and then maybe it's ESPN. Like, they understand that, but you know, there's a lot of sacrifice in this business, you know, and you know, whether you're behind the scenes or in front of the camera, you know, there's sacrifice.
I think you can basically say that, you know, nights, weekends, holidays, especially when you're starting out, they simply go by the wayside, because that's when the events are happening. And that's how, you know, you're out. I can't tell you the number of times early on in my career, you know, vacation relief, I'll take it. I'll do it, you know, even if it means working 18 hours.
Yeah, I mean, it's opportunity. Take advantage of the opportunity, and I'll go back to it starts right here now. I'm going to give a shout out and a plug to my sports reporting students, many of whom are here, all of whom should be here, but The Seton Hall men's soccer team, right, is going to the Sweet 16. And they won the Big East tournament for the first time in 30 years. Not a lot of men's soccer, college men's soccer coverage going on in New Jersey right now, especially with the lack of newspapers and whatever. So on our website that we established for our class, we probably have 20 stories up over the last 2 weeks on the men's soccer team. That's the place to go to, and that's worth something.
And they won last night.
They did.
Yeah, and University Leadership is corresponding with Dr. Nair today. He mentioned he had been at the game last night. And we're going to close with a reflection from the president of the university, because so much has changed in the past year. As we said, sports has changed, journalism has changed, education has changed. And higher education, certainly Seton Hall, a vital part in that community, has been dealing with the what you would call a value proposition for students and their families. The expense, is it worth it? On the other side of this education, what is there? And it's called that cost-benefit calculation for students and families. And here's Dr. Nair's thoughts.
So then step back from that and shine a bright light with the virus on the sector, and it becomes very clear. Right? So we'll see institutions that won't succeed through the virus. Some may not open in the fall. Other institutions that were already stressed and already close to not making it may go one more year and have to merge with another school. I do think you're going to see a wave of strategic partnerships, mergers and acquisitions in higher ed that will look somewhat like the healthcare system for the last 15 years, but the process will be very different. There's no sector like higher ed. There's no sector where your students or consumers have a lifelong connection to their institution for a transformation they receive, and they come back and visit it on a regular basis. So all of those things are about to happen. It'll be painful to watch, but it'll also be very exciting, I think, to be part of. I think there's a lot of opportunity for Seton Hall. We're in the final phases of crafting our strategic plan. We're modifying it now in the context of COVID, but I see very positive things in the future for Seton Hall. We're going to take some budget hits this year and probably in the fall for all the things we've done, much of it voluntary, to help support students and help mitigate the damage the virus has caused to university operations. But at the end of the day, I think we'll emerge from this stronger with more partnerships and revisiting the portfolio of academic programs we offer that I think will make Seton Hall even stronger.
We should point out that was last April, and certainly with the benefit of hindsight, just put that through the
I'd ask everybody
the lens here. Like, oops, you got that?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Look, in radio we call it running combo, but that was Dr. Nair last April. But I mean, so much has changed, and the leadership of every sector of society has gone through: journalism, sports business, sports media, and higher education.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Nair used it a couple times, opportunity, and there are opportunities on the other side of it. There are opportunities right now. And, just for everybody, in terms of forming, relationships, and I'm by no means saying, that I have a close relationship with Dr. Nair. I think he's done a terrific job here at Seton Hall. Met him, fortunate to meet him a few times. But I've had students and faculty and so forth say, well, how the heck did you get Dr. Nair to come to your class in the middle of this pandemic when they're trying to figure out what to do? Not only with learning and the university and the budget. I asked. Sometimes it's as simple as that. I didn't hound him. I asked, and he said yes, and so he came.
Yeah, so it's a simple, and it was a fascinating time. So that basically is our tour of the horizon of the past year plus, which I have thoroughly enjoyed. I don't know if there are any Q&A here, but
yeah, I know we've gone a little over time, but I want to give the students an opportunity for 5 minutes or so to ask questions. So if you have a question for for Bob or myself about anything that you've heard, or just the field in general, please raise your hand, and we'll try to get to a few in our remaining time. So any questions, just raise your hand, and then we'll call on you, and and you can ask your questions. So
we like to thank the folks at IT, the tech folks at Seton Hall for their help through all of these special events that we were able to do this year. The panels in November and in February and whatnot. It was, I think, going through the pandemic, we all know everyone shared the experience, but experienced it differently. But it gave us moments of community where otherwise we didn't have them. And it was important, I think, for all of us to get together, whether it was a class or whether it was a panel, to share our interests and just to have that connection. It was pretty neat.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, I completely agree. We couldn't have done it without, not only the help of, of all them, but Amanda Carcione in the dean's office and all the support, our friends at Stillman who help us, promote and reach more people. All right, we have a question from Dylan Offman. Dylan, you can go ahead if you can turn your camera on, unmute, and ask your question.
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble putting on my camera. I think it was with the privacy settings at the beginning, but just want to say thank you for all of this and all this information. I'm a student at the University of Michigan. My professor sent me this link, and it's just been an honor to kind of sit down and hear all these people talk. But my question for either one of you really is, we've heard a lot about kind of putting yourself out there and taking what opportunities you have, and certain talks about strategizing that. But for you and your experience, especially with I believe, Bob, you said something about getting reps with radio and writing and stuff like that. Do you have kind of a strategy for that? Sorry about my dog in the background.
No, that's okay. And the University of Michigan, we're not going to bring up the 1989 foul call, are we? That's okay. I think it's a matter of, being aggressive, being aggressive in your thinking and taking the opportunities. You cannot, it starts with writing. If you can't write a paper well, just a simple 3 to 5 page, assignment, then you've got to be able to master that. It gets back to what Tom Rinaldi said. Do you want to be on radio? Do you want to find out, is it for me? And find out with, do some reps, whether as a disc jockey, as we call them in my time, a radio host, or doing news and sports. You want to be play-by-play. Not saying no is important, because I know Seth Markman said in the soundbite that first job is important, and it is. But quite often that first job, especially if you're not on air, may not be exactly what you want to do, but it's a job. Now, the economy and the reality that you guys and ladies are walking into is different than the one I walked into. And I had to step past the dinosaurs back in the 70s when I went out into the real world, and you look for a job. Well, now you're looking for gigs that, all accumulate into an income stream. We mentioned, for example, Keith, a young man who's just a graduate, who's been a big assist to this program and did a lot of work with us. BJ, what is he? He's I won't say cobbled together. That sounds like he's shooting games for the Jets and for the NFL. He's got private clients. He's doing political commercials. All of this has aggregated less than a year and a half out of school. And that's his thing right now. And he's got all of that. And whatever works best, I assume he's going to pursue.
Absolutely. And I agree with everything Bob said, Dylan. And I would just add one very simple thing. The opportunities out there are not going to come to you. You have to find them. So search for those opportunities and make your own breaks. Very rarely are the jobs out there that are listed and, are going to come to you. You're going to have to find those opportunities. Sometimes you're going to have to freelance in order to get somebody's eye.
Or make it, creative.
Right.
Blog for yourself or all of the there are social platforms out there I don't even know about. You guys are probably on.
Yeah.
And the opportunities are there if, for you to create something and have a distinctive voice. I talk about, develop your own voice, but you got to have the basics down. You got to understand journalism. You have to understand how to write. When you do that, then all right, how do I want to tell a story? There are 10 different ways to tell each story. None of them are right or wrong. They're all different. all be good if they're done well.
Absolutely. All right, we might have time for one more question. If someone has, something real quick, raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll sign off. All right, if there are no other questions, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I really want to thank Bob, not only for, today, but, for all, his support, friendship, and for engaging, with the students. It's, I hope you guys know and appreciate how special this is.